In the NFL, is bigger always better? In a game where large men violently crash into other large men, sometimes shorter can actually be an advantage. We're not knocking height. Plenty of times it's better to be taller, of course. But let's examine the advantages and disadvantages of size in every position group. You'll even see the position group that found the one formula for success, but you'll never see it again. This is the gridiron. The average height of a quarterback is 6'3", and for good reason. When a quarterback drops back, he wants to survey the field and see over the tops of his offensive linemen. Usually, taller is better. That's why you see a lot of success from Tom Brady, 6'4", Peyton Manning, 6'5", Patrick Mahomes, 6'2", and so many others. Height is an advantage, and scouts look for that. That's why, among many other reasons, even though Caleb Williams is touted as the most desirable pick of the 2024 draft, he's only 6'1", which is why many are more excited about Drake May and Jaden Daniels, both 6'4". But can shorter quarterbacks be great? At times. Look at Russell Wilson at 5'11" and Drew Brees at 6 foot. They've both won a Super Bowl. But how many times did Brees struggle seeing over his linemen? How many times did Wilson have difficulty seeing his receivers downfield? Brees made up for it with precision timing. Russell had his scrambling and speed, as does Kyler Murray at 5'10". Shorter quarterbacks have to make up for their size with other strengths. Take into consideration the 2023 draft. Everyone was wild over Bryce Young, the #1 pick at 5'10". There were many other factors, but he struggled, and his team went 2-15. Meanwhile, the #2 pick in that same draft, C.J. Stroud, is much taller at 6'3". As a rookie, he led his team to the playoffs. It's not all about height with quarterbacks, but taller quarterbacks have better vision and ultimately are more successful. So how tall are the people blocking in front of them? Offensive linemen on average stand at 6'4". Tackles are around 6'5", guards are 6'4", and centers are 6'3". Offensive linemen need to be big and tall, and there's just no way around it. When they're pass blocking, they don't want defensive linemen jumping and getting their hands up to block passes. When they're run blocking, they want to be able to plow over defenders. When you're shorter, you have less leverage. Here are some of the best offensive lines as of late. The Eagles, Jason Kelce, 6'3", Landon Dickerson, 6'6", Jordan Mailata, 6'8", Lane Johnson, 6'6", Cam Jurgens, 6'3". They pushed a lot of people around, especially on those tush pushes. The Lions, Taylor Decker, 6'7", Jonah Jackson, 6'4", Frank Ragnow, 6'5", Graham Glasgow, 6'6", Penei Sewell, 6'5". One of their backups and former Super Bowl winner, Dan Skipper at 6'10", is the tallest active player in the NFL. Height is extremely important to the offensive line positions. You won't find any lineman shorter than 6'1", and even that's a little too short. But are they taller than their defensive counterparts? Defensive linemen are usually the largest players on the field, averaging between 6'2" and 6'5". Being tall is an advantage. Trying to plow past the offensive line, trying to swat down passes. The taller they are, the better. That's why you see a lot of success from 6'8" Calais Campbell, or with 6'5" J.J. Watt, or with legends like Michael Strahan or Reggie White, both 6'5". But there's another facet to the job of the defensive lineman: stopping the run. For this, it's a lot more important to be wide and take up space. Look at Warren Sapp and Vince Wilfork, both 6'2". Even 6'1" Aaron Donald has seen tremendous success with his strength and quickness. But successful shorter linemen are rare in the league. If you want to be one of the reasons your team wins multiple Super Bowls, being 6'6" like Chris Jones helps a lot. But what about the guys backing them up? Linebackers tend to be shorter than defensive linemen, between 6'1" and 6'4". Think of some of the best: Ray Lewis, 6'1", Dick Butkus, 6'3", Lawrence Taylor, 6'3". This position group has a defined sweet spot. Linebackers that are too tall may be slower and unable to keep up with receivers and tight ends. But they don't want to be too small when it comes time to tackle someone, especially a running back. An offense could just dominate them, like the Bills did against the Cowboys with their smaller, faster linebacking core in Week 15 of the 2023 season. The Bills constantly had larger offensive players blocking the Cowboys linebackers and pushed them around all day. In a game where Josh Allen only completed 7 passes for 94 yards, the Bills still won 31-10 because James Cook ran for 179 yards. But if you do have the ground game covered, who's stopping the big plays? On average, defensive backs are around 6 feet. It isn't always the case that taller players aren't as fast, but oftentimes the fastest DBs in the league are shorter. You want speed in a corner so they can cover the best receivers. However, being too short is a disadvantage when matched up against tall receivers and tight ends. We've seen tremendous success from DBs on the shorter side, standing at 5'11", Ty Law and Ed Reed. How about Troy Polamalu at 5'10"? They have agility, power, and speed, which more than made up for their smaller stature. However, let's look at some shutdown corners. Deion Sanders at 6'1" and Richard Sherman at 6'3". You think their height had anything to do with it? When matched up with those 6'5" receivers and tight ends, there was less worry about the receivers going up top and high-pointing the ball. Height is great, but speed and skill are far more important for this position. 5'11" Darrelle Revis didn't have an issue putting tall receivers like Randy Moss and Calvin Johnson on Revis Island. Wide receivers on average are 6'1", and tight ends on average are 6'3". These positions are interesting as they're both mainly pass-catching positions, but are also quite different. For tight ends, it's always better to be taller. It helps in the receiving game, but tight ends are expected to block a lot, and they don't want diminished size. Some of the best tight ends ever: Tony Gonzalez, 6'5", Jimmy Graham, 6'7", Travis Kelce, 6'5". Rob Gronkowski, one of the best blocking tight ends, was 6'6". Shannon Sharpe at 6'2" is the shortest notable tight end that you'll hear of. Shorter than that, it's gonna be tough. But wide receivers see a wide range of heights. You've got Steve Smith and Tyreek Hill at 5'9". Both are excellent route runners and use their smaller stature to find holes in the coverage, not to mention Hill's speed. If you can get behind the defense regularly, it doesn't matter how tall you are. New England revolutionized the small receiver game with middle-of-the-field routes and underneath routes, using the quickness of smaller receivers as an advantage. Danny Amendola, 5'11", Julian Edelman, 5'10", and most famously Wes Welker at 5'9", who led the league in receptions in 2007 with 112 total. Welker also had the benefit of playing alongside 6'4" Randy Moss. Sure, receivers like Moss and 6'5" Calvin Johnson had tough contests against Darrelle Revis, but they didn't have bad matchups often. Height is usually good for a receiver. Along with those two, some of the best receivers include Michael Irvin, 6'2", Terrell Owens, 6'3", and Jerry Rice, 6'2". You see, shorter receivers can be good, but they need other attributes to elevate their game, and they need coaches and quarterbacks who know how to use them. Taller receivers are less dependent on those things. Worst comes to worst, they can go up for a jump ball over the shorter defender. There's a reason the expression is "you got mossed" and not "you got welkered." On average, the shortest position group, ranging between 5'9" and 6'2", running backs, can thrive at many heights. For them, being shorter is usually better. Barry Sanders was 5'8", Darren Sproles was 5'6", Maurice Jones-Drew was 5'7". Shorter backs get lost in a pile, disappear behind linemen, then use elusiveness to break free. If they're built like Jones-Drew, when you do find them, they bowl right over you. In today's NFL, a 1-2 punch works best. Think about the 2022 Cowboys with Ezekiel Elliott at 6 foot, and 225 pounds, mind you, and Pollard at 6 foot and 209 pounds. A big and small back, whether varying in height or weight, is a great combination. The 2022 Cowboys were 8th in rushing, with 2,298 rushing yards. In 2023, the Cowboys parted ways with Zeke, making Pollard the lead back. The next two backs on their depth chart were 5'11" Rico Dowdle and 5'5" Deuce Vaughn. How'd that work out? The 2023 Cowboys dropped to 14th in the league in rushing with 1,920 yards. So where are all the big backs? Like 6'3" Larry Zonka, who led the league in 1971 in yards per attempt. How about Burt Cohn at 6'5", who led the league in yards per attempt in 1966? Or one of the best-known big bruisers, Brandon Jacobs at 6'4". Jacobs hunted for contact and ran people over. He was a big contributor in both the Giants' 2007 and 2011 Super Bowl winning years. In 2007, he had over 1,000 rushing yards. Today, Derrick Henry at 6'3" seems to be the last remaining big back that can still make a difference. So why don't more teams opt for tall running backs? It feels like a formula for success, but there's a problem. Running backs have the shortest careers on average of any position group, and they're the lowest paid position too. Take an amazing athlete that's 6'4", wanting to play football. Should he take the shorter-termed, lower-paying running back position? Or should he opt to be a receiver or tight end? Running back is the most devalued position nowadays, so if you've got the height to play a different position, you're going to want to. Usually, there's a significant advantage in football by being taller. Sometimes being shorter can actually be better, but like anything else in life, most of the time it's the combination of value that you can bring.